Hello again, everybody. Retro Monster Truck Review coming right at you. This time we're covering Flemington, New Jersey, 1990. And this event, I got to tell you, Matt, this one really sticks out in as far as the history of monster truck racing goes. This is the return of Bigfoot 8. We see a return of USA 1 after a horrible crash in Richmond, Virginia, just a few weeks prior. And then the stretch just leading up to this event, that 5 event stretch that Bigfoot was on, with Bigfoot number 4 leading up to the return of number 8. It's just some of the most incredible racing in monster truck history in a 5-week span.
Oh man, it's tremendous racing, side by side, straight tracks every week during this stretch, long outdoor courses. You never know who's going to win every week. We had a few different winners throughout that summer stretch, and the points, was getting a little bit tight. Equalizer was stretching out front, but the middle of the pack was tightening up a whole bunch.
Oh yeah, the middle of the pack is, I mean, literally was like I think it was like 96 points between 5th and 10th in points. And that is unheard of in any form of racing, really, especially in monster trucks back in the day. You had Dennis Anderson just barely holding that lead right there in 5th. And then all the way down, we look to see, I believe, Buffalo Tremor in 10th still has a shot to jump up into the top 5.
Yeah, and TNT is running these events every single week. There's a couple little gaps in there throughout the summer that they don't have a weekend of racing, but the lineups move around a little bit. But heading into Flemington, we really get down to really the 12 best trucks on the TNT Tour.
Yep, that's 100% correct here. And I figured with the restoration of one of the most influential monster trucks in history, I think it's about time we talk about its return to TNT here. This is the return of Bigfoot number 8. Now, previously on the show, when Doug Welker was on, we covered Dallas 1990 and the events leading up to Dallas, which was the banning of Bigfoot 8, the return of Bigfoot number 4 to run. I mean, the stretch that, before we get to the return of 8 here, I should say the stretch that 4 was on, like I said, some of the best racing you would ever see. We had Dallas, the 3-wide racing. Most controversial thing about that, the banning of Bigfoot 8 before that. Plenty of monster trucks hitting the wall. Clydesdale, rolling over with the collision with Wild Hair. USA 1 getting into the generator. Buffalo Tremor and a few other trucks getting into the wall. The wild pounces of Master of Disaster. Then you scroll to the very next week. We had Louisville, the big figure 8. We talked about that with Jason Rona on the podcast. The race between Bigfoot and Carolina Crusher in the semifinal round on one of those days, followed by Equalizer and Bigfoot 4 in the final round. 2 of the best and longest monster truck races in history. You skip ahead just a little bit to Richmond. You get Dennis Anderson, Gravedigger, stealing a win from Equalizer, riding on 2 wheels down the track. Then the big thing happens, and that's Steve Wilkie just ripping the entire front axle housing and assembly, tires and all, out from underneath USA 1.
Yeah, huge run of events here. Again, USA 1 taking the big spill. I forget what number rollover it was at that point within a 2-year span, but, sheared the whole front axle out from underneath the truck, barrel rolls it down the shutdown area at Richmond International Raceway. They're running all summer here, and they've got to get these trucks back going, and you may miss an event or two, but these guys did an incredible job back then, getting the trucks back together after the damage. You go all the way back to Dallas. Marvin Smith had to put a whole new chassis underneath Wild Hair after that incident. And, he's back on the tour now. And Clydesdale got rebuilt. And it's just amazing to see how much drama and excitement goes on in this 1990 TNT season. If you marathon watch this Tough Track series on YouTube, and there's a playlist for it that's set up, somebody put it together, you can watch this episode for episode, the Tough Tracks versions that are the full episodes, and man, it plays out like a TV drama every week. There's just so many storylines going on.
Oh yeah, the 2 biggest storylines come the next following week, and that's the return of King Kong and Bowling Green, one of the original monster trucks. Then the very next week, the death of King Kong as it runs over a 76 sign and does the awesome rollover that it had. Thank God Steve Kane was okay from that, by the way. But one interesting note that always seems to get lost in that shuffle is at Myrtle Beach, David Morris returns behind the wheel of No Problem of all trucks. Just seesaw, drivers going back and forth, trucks being rebuilt, trucks being crashed. Just the evolution of the sport happens so fast in about a 5-event span for TNT. And then we get to Flemington.
Yeah, things are definitely happening fast. You talk about Morris and Equalizer. in the early part of the '90s season, takes the break after Roanoke.
Yep,
His
Roanoke.
wife has a child, and already by summer he's looking to get back into a monster truck, and he hooks up with John Moore for a couple events there. Doesn't end up sticking in there. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but he does some other stuff before he eventually makes his return about a year later in July of 1991 to take back the reins of the Equalizer. And heading into Flemington, there's just so much going on. Let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, let's talk about Flemington Speedway itself. You have in your notes here, it was open from 1915 to 2002. It was a 5/8 mile rectangular oval. If you kind of look at it, it almost reminds me of a miniature Indianapolis Motor Speedway on dirt. This track was really cool to look at. It's also the home track of legendary crew chief and SRX creator here, Ray Evernham. NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series actually ran here when it was paved from 1995 to 1998. And now, unfortunately, there's a shopping center on the site.
Yeah, if you go to Lowe's, you're at Flemington Speedway. So one of the other interesting things about the Speedway is they were one of the innovators of softer walls. They were one of the first tracks that put big foam blocks around the outside of the track in front of the concrete walls to help deaden, some of the impact for these drivers. They were doing it, decades ago. And, now obviously everywhere we go, most circle tracks in America that are NASCAR, Craftsman Truck Series and above are all running safer barriers or some kind of adaptable, softer wall. And Flemington was kind of a pioneer in that regard.
Yeah, but speaking of NASCAR, really quick, we got to throw the news out there. Of course, I'm a massive Digger fan. Congratulations to Kevin Harvick on that awesome-looking Gravedigger car that's going to run this weekend in Nashville. Cannot wait to see that thing going, by the way. Just got to throw that out there before we get started here. Our lineup for this event, Matt, like you said, probably the top 12 trucks on the TNT Tour at this moment in time. We've got Bigfoot 8, the return with Andy Brass behind the wheel. Auto Value King Crunch and Scott Stevens. Equalizer, Greg Holbrook, the current points leader. Marvin Smith and Wild Hair, Clydesdale with Bennett Clark, a Gravedigger number 2 with Dennis Anderson, the Outlaw, Mike Wine, Buffalo Tremor, No Problem, Nightlife, Carolina Crusher, USA 1, just all trucks that you would associate with TNT are in this lineup, and the fans in Flemington are getting treated to a show.
A show they'll get for sure. And as Army Armstrong always called them later on, it's the Dirty Dozen heading into New Jersey for a TNT Monster Truck Challenge. And, we're talking about the Tough Tracks episode here on the Retro Monster Truck Review, but it's worth noting that this episode was broadcast in 3 different environments. You had your syndicated Tough Tracks, which was on your local affiliates. It could have been a Fox, ABC, NBC station, whoever it could have been, regional sports network. Probably on it, Saturday at 2:30 in the morning in a lot of markets, but a lot of places, did get that show on television. It was also broadcast in 2 different half-hour formats. It was on ESPN and their Monster Truck Challenge, which was basically a condensed version of Tough Tracks, and they had a little bit of unique, a couple interviews and stuff that they would do separate that would only air on that version, but the graphics package and the way that the show's presented is kind of similar. And then it was also on Trucks and Tractor Power on TNN. So you have these shows that are, being edited by a variety of different companies, airing on different channels. And Army Armstrong, he's there live, and then he had to record the show at least twice in the studio after the fact.
Because he's dealing with a different broadcaster for each event.
Right, and it's amazing that he can keep it as fresh as he does for his commentary that's there in the studio afterward.
Yeah, we were talking NASCAR a few seconds ago. Larry McReynolds does that to this day. He goes from Fox to NBC. I can't imagine what Army Armstrong had to go through with 3 separate networks sometimes.
Hey, 3 separate networks. Sometimes that equals up to 3 separate paychecks. I could see why he'd do it.
Well, yeah, I can see that. I forgot about the paycheck part of it there, but now we go into this weekend. Bigfoot 8's obviously back here. It had been running in several different other promotions other than TNT. The truck was still kind of fresh. It wasn't like they just parked it and put it in the back. The truck still got ran, but we hadn't seen it since Albuquerque on this tour. And when it ran in Albuquerque, this truck was unbeatable. Keep in mind, though, Albuquerque Indoor Stadium, they're going over a roller hill and about, I think, 5 to 7 cars at the end of the track. That was it. That was all Bigfoot 8 had to do. Now it's coming out here on a big course. This is a track with 7 cars on the first jump and at least 12 cars on the second jump here. I don't know what the suspension's going to do with this truck. I'm sure Bigfoot didn't know what this truck was going to do either when they got it outdoors.
Bigfoot 8 at that point was the most tested truck in history, but even Bob Chandler didn't have that many cars sitting out in their test field to
Yeah.
try to do runs out there by Gateway International Raceway, where they did a lot of the testing. And like we said, indoor tracks throughout the winter. Bigfoot 8's doing very well. People say they dominated. They did dominate a few events, and they were pretty close on a couple other ones. I wouldn't call it a complete and total blowout, but they made up a bunch of points in a hurry and led to the ban. And we could talk a little bit later as we talk about the handling of Bigfoot 8 of how the truck really would have done on some of those other outdoor events. We'll get to that discussion maybe a little bit later.
As we open the show, we see a pass from Andy Brass and Bigfoot 8. As Scott Douglas says, Bigfoot 8 is looking for Equalizer and the world title. Also, USA 1 is looking to rebound from a nasty flip a few weeks ago in Richmond, Virginia. The superstars of the monster truck racing are here at Flemington, New Jersey to take on this racing course. This track is normally used for East Coast modified racing, according to Scott. And Scott also recaps the accident from 1 week prior, and that, of course, is the famous King Kong rollover. We'll get to that one on the Retro Monster Truck Review. Don't you worry. But, man, just to make a touch on Myrtle Beach, this is the last show for Bigfoot number 4, and what truck actually, according to the driver anyway, retires Bigfoot 4? Mike Wine and Outlaw. It's a little surprised they don't mention Mike Wine technically, quote-unquote, retiring Bigfoot 4 from TNT.
Yeah, the Outlaw is running really good this summer. They had just gotten hooked up with the Super Winch people, getting a big sponsor to buy a new injected alcohol engine. Really bumps up their program. And, Mike has a little trouble on the first day, I think it was, in Myrtle Beach as well, kind of hopping over the wall. But obviously, King Kong does a much more spectacular version of that, going over the wall, taking out the 76 sign, lands on top of 2 police cars. And the story is always that those police cars were brand new. That's not entirely true. I found some newspaper articles about the event and the accident. Now, the cars had been freshly repaired due to damage that was suffered during Hurricane Hugo. But if you look at those cars, they're definitely not new model, Chevy Caprices that they'd have been using for cop cars in 1990. They were a good 5-6 years old, but it makes for a good story to say that they were brand new police cars.
Well, as Army Armstrong says, to quote and end this little portion of the show, everything that could go wrong did go wrong for King Kong in that race.
Yeah, I mean, Kane, everybody talks about him getting out and heading back down the track and how quick he got out of the truck. I'm sure he had to have been pretty spooked in that accident. And I can't wait for, whichever co-host gets to talk about that event with you, because there was a star-studded weekend full of a lot of action and excitement there in Myrtle Beach as well.
We cut back to Flemington and we see Bigfoot 8 with Army exclaiming, "Look who's back in town." Interesting thing that I caught just as they were getting ready to pull the camera away is Andy signing a TNT yearbook, and which trucks are on the exact same page with each other? Bigfoot and Gravedigger.
That's it. Your 2 headliners at any TNT show, most likely by that point. So it's got a picture of Gravedigger and looks like Bigfoot, maybe number 3 on that page that Andy's signing. They're, at the TNT pit party behind the stands at the Flemington Speedway. TNT, one of the earlier innovators of the, kind of meet and greet pit party atmosphere. They did it before pretty much every show, from what I understand.
Yeah, they are certainly innovators in that aspect here. And the innovative thing that we actually see here is Army interviewing Andy Brass during this pit party. And you see that Army basically says, "Hey, Bigfoot 8's back in town. We're standing here with the driver, and this man has a whole lot of pressure on his shoulders." He says, "Andy, it's time to go to war." Andy says, "You know what? That's right. We've been out. We haven't been running this truck for about 2.5 months now. We've lost a lot of points. Me having to come back to get points is a lot of pressure on me. I'm going to have to run the truck hard and watch these guys and see how they're running. And you really, push the truck. It's going to be hard, but I think we can do it." A lot of confidence from Andy Brass right there in that statement.
A lot of confidence, and like you said, there is a lot of pressure as well. You're viewed as the big guy in town coming back. You're expected to win in that Bigfoot truck, and especially with the technological advantage that they had at the time with Bigfoot 8, on paper, looks like Bigfoot 8 should be the easy winner. So we'll see how it actually plays out in reality as the show goes on.
Army continues on here, and he actually asks, hey, real quick, why is this truck so different? And Andy simply replies, we run a cantilever suspension, 18 inches of travel in the front and 24 inches of travel in the back. The truck has a lot of side-to-side and front-to-rear roll. We got a lot of weight distribution inside the truck as well. It gets a lot of traction. It carries the front tires. It's like a sponge. Once it lands, it sticks, and he is not wrong with that. The issue that they're going to have here with this truck, though, is it's not going to get a chance to land all that much over that first set of cars. But we'll get to that just a little bit here. I thought this was a great interview here from Army to Andy Brass to say, hey, look, who's back, though? I didn't really like that. 4 was on the tour. Bigfoot is, I mean, saying Bigfoot is back. Bigfoot never left. Just the racer came back. I think the way they spun that just a little bit wrong. But other than that, I thought the interview was fantastic.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest storylines of the season. At least Bigfoot 8's back, and Andy Brass is back. He did fill in for Pyatt in Louisville when Pyatt suffered a small injury, but Pyatt hopped right back at 4 and finished out the middle of that summer stretch. And, to a degree, the main Bigfoot truck, the racer, is back, and Andy definitely had to be feeling the pressure, and not to say Andy got into his own head a little bit with it, but you could see how much effort Andy put into analyzing the situation every time he was at the racetrack and taking stock of everything around you and being aware of your circumstances and your surroundings.
On the other side of the coin now, we have Gary Cook and Equalizer, who have been on a good stretch with his new driver, Greg Holbrook, behind the wheel. Holbrook winning in Dallas in one of those events. I believe he also took a win a little bit later on at, I want to say Myrtle Beach. I could be wrong there. Don't shoot me in the comments. But Holbrook behind the wheel, giving attaboy to Gary here for picking a hand like Greg to come in and drive this truck after the quick, sudden departure of David Morris. We had one show where Mike Wine got to fill in, and then the next thing we know, here's this kid out of nowhere, Greg Holbrook, just out of nowhere comes in. Nobody had really ever heard of this guy other than maybe guys that race quads.
Yeah, it's amazing. And in just a few short months, we're talking 3 or 4 months, he's one of the most, dominant forces in monster truck racing in that Equalizer truck. And Gary talks, to Chris Chapman here saying that, we're up to the challenge to hang in there with Bigfoot 8. They've been given the truck, new shocks and other smaller little updates throughout the season, but he wants to keep the truck reliable. He's worried that Bigfoot 8 may be too engineered and may suffer some breakage, and that they're going to stick with their reliable combination. And boy, I bet he wish he could take those words back by the end of the season.
Yeah, I kind of wish he would too here. I like the bold question that Chris starts off with. Basically says, hey, Bigfoot 8 is here. Can you handle him? And Gary goes on and answers that question. But her second question was a little weird to me. It says, Bigfoot 8 did take some time off to let some other trucks come up to par with his machine. What type of adjustments did you make to Equalizer? I hated the way she first worded that part of that question. Hey, you know what? Bigfoot 8 took some time off just so you guys could catch up to him. It just, I don't know. The way that she words that just rubbed me the wrong way.
Well, that's how TNT explained it when they came to the agreement, and there was a lawsuit filed and injunctions and a whole mess that you can read about if you do enough digging on the internet. But the general consensus is the agreement to sit Bigfoot 8 out for a few months and allow the other guys literally to catch up technologically. Now, in reality, that didn't really happen, because by the time Bigfoot 8 returns, there's not really any new debuts on the circuit. Porter's truck was just about finished by this point, and it would debut in July here at Pocono Raceway, the new Carolina Crusher number 3, but he'd run his old truck through August and wouldn't debut it on the TNT Tour till after Stafford. I think he might have started running it at Hagerstown. I can't remember. But there's no real new debuts, so the idea that everybody actually did get caught up to Bigfoot 8 technologically is kind of a misnomer.
Yeah, it's a blasphemous statement almost. I mean, at best, all the guys could do was try and give themselves a little bit more horsepower to compete with the truck on the outdoor circuit. And, I mean, it doesn't even really hold a candle to, I mean, you could throw as much horsepower as you want to. Speaking of horsepower, USA 1 is the next truck that they talk about here, and this is kind of why I'm bringing this up. USA 1, they go back, they have to fix the whole front end of this truck to bring it back. And they miss a little bit of this Bigfoot 4 stretch that Bigfoot 4 was on, When they come back, they obviously have quite a lot of horsepower, but they don't have anywhere near the suspension. A lot of people thought after the Richmond accident, Jasmer's going to bring out a brand new truck. They thought surely he would have to bring out a brand new truck. And now what they do, they put a new dress on USA 1.
Yeah, and Everett had been working on that truck, started on it throughout the 89 season, from what I understand, and they just never got the truck done because they were crashing the old truck so much. We're talking July 18th, 17th and 18th is this Flemington show. Exactly a month earlier, June 16th is when he rolls over in Richmond. And I don't think they did necessarily a complete rebody on the truck because it looks like the A-pillars still got a pretty big dent in it. But they redressed the truck, got it back running. Steve explains that it was quicker to get the old truck back running than to finish the new truck. And well, the new truck never would get finished. It's still sitting in Everett's shop, incomplete at this point, as far as I know.
Yeah, I've actually been told that if you were to walk into Everett Jasmer's shop right now, it's almost like a time capsule from 1990. If you walk into this place, there's a lot of stuff that's covered in dust. There's a lot of desks that are still sitting there with papers, pens, and old telephones still sitting on them for the USA 1 team. It'd almost be cool just to go up there, just to walk in there and see this time capsule from monster truck history, which is the USA 1 shop.
I hope to make it up there someday because everybody that's ever gone there that I've talked to has said that Everett's, will take as much time as he can to hang out and show everybody everything, all the cool prototypes and various pieces of equipment that he still has there. It pretty much is frozen in time, as you said.
Going to the point standings for the 1990 TNT Tour. At this moment, Equalizer sitting at 535, Bigfoot 455, Carolina Crusher 426, King Crunch 411, and then a drastic drop from 4th to 5th in points here as Gravedigger sits at 284, Awesome Kong 276, USA 1 254, Nightlife 251, Outlaw 225, and Buffalo Tremor at 198. Like I said, between 6th and 10th here is a big, not necessarily a big swing in points, less than 100 points right there.
Yeah, and then you add in the last two trucks in this lineup. I believe, what is it? You got No Problem, and mine's drawing a blank on the other one that's sitting outside of the top 10 in points. But we've got the top runners of TNT here again, and as we talked earlier, the points in the middle of the pack really tightening up, and it's going to get even tighter, I think, before the weekend's over.
Yeah, it makes you wonder where No Problem and Wild Hair would be at in points. I mean, they only show the top 10 here, but I've always been a fan of seeing the entire spreadsheet of points. It's one thing NASCAR did for a number of years. Now they only show you the playoff standings and the top 20 or so in points. I would prefer to see a list of all of these guys and see exactly where they're at. But unfortunately, I don't think anybody has that list other than maybe it's somewhere inside the Feld Motorsports headquarters.
Well, and a shout out to Tim Ray. He's been releasing some old stuff from TNT Motorsports. Maybe he's got some manila folders hiding somewhere that we haven't found yet. But he's been doing a great job putting some of the old videos he used to edit for TNT up on YouTube. So check out his YouTube channel, some of the old banquet videos. And he did a video for Dennis Anderson in 1989 with Bad to the Bone as the background track. I'm not sure if that's where it started or not, but it's a cool watch. Check out Tim Ray's channel on YouTube.
I'm going to have to give that a watch. We go into qualifying highlights. We got Marvin Smith and Wild Hair pulling up in the left lane next to Equalizer in the right lane. Scott points out that we need to keep our eyes on Equalizer, the current points leader. Army says one of the big questions coming into Flemington was, how is this rookie driver going to react to the pressure that's rolling in with Bigfoot 8? Well, this qualifying shot's going to tell you something. Holbrook gets a launch over the cars, and then you notice immediately it looks like the truck kicks the left rear tire. It sinks into about the fifth car on the stack. Suspension unloads awkwardly, and the truck actually has a really bad bounce in the rear, which causes the truck to veer to the right after the first set of cars. Holbrook actually has to take another qualifying pass with a 3-second penalty because this pass is a DQ. He does not get both front tires up onto the next set of cars.
Yeah, and the hard right, is kind of a strange instance on this run. We're going to see a lot of steering issues throughout the weekend, but I'm not sure if Holbrook came off the cars kind of with the wheels turned a little bit. It looks like he may have, and then when the truck finally hooked up and dug in no man's land, it pulled him further. But I'm not sure exactly where the DQ, at what point of the run the DQ was called. It's a real judgment call if he got both front tires up the second ramp, but he actually got all four tires off the cars by the end of the stack. So even if he'd have got the first part done with the front two, he was off by the end of the finish line and would have been
The
DQ'd.
2-and-2 rule is going to kick in there at some point. The TNT had, and that's going to be where your DQ probably happens.
Mm-hmm.
Greg comes back and runs a 3-second penalty pass, but he actually does so after Bigfoot a little bit later. Interesting to note, Bigfoot also gets disqualified. The two top trucks in points here, Matt, get DQ'd in their races. The interesting thing, though, about the Bigfoot 8 DQ is it had to just irk Andy Brash just a little bit because the guy in the other lane was the one that was sitting there poking and trying to get Bigfoot 8 banned, Scott Stevens.
Yeah, we talk a lot here on the Retro Monster Truck Review. You and I are both RC racers, and there's those days where you just show up and the first thing that you do in the day goes wrong and things just snowball from there. This is kind of going to be one of those weekends for the Bigfoot team and for the Equalizer team. They show up with their sights set high. They're going to war with each other. They never really even get to meet each other because they have so many problems. Brass comes off that first set, and you could see he kind of lands on that last car coming off of the off-ramp. The truck takes an even harder right than Equalizer does. Brass completely misses the second set of cars. And, there's a lot of discussion. I've talked with Jason Rona at length about, what maybe caused this issue that would plague Bigfoot 8 throughout the summer. And I think it's kind of a combination of there may have been some kind of driveline problem. The trucks went on a long run here of like 3 or 4 weeks away from the shops, doing multiple events a week. They may have had a breakage right off the bat that caused some of this. Also, the sway bars on Bigfoot 8 were very soft at this point, and I'm willing to bet that they had something going on in the steering too, because if you watch Andy as he corrects back and forth, the steering is not very quick to respond.
Yeah, it's not responding very quickly to him at all. But one thing to point out was his interview earlier in the event where he talked about how it's got a lot of side-to-side roll, it's got a lot of forward-to-back roll, and I mean, you can throw the best suspension out there in the world, but if you throw it out there on an uneven course like a monster truck track at the time, it's going to cause this issue that they're having with Bigfoot. This truck just veers hard to the right and completely misses the cars after hitting a hole in the left side of the first set of cars. That shows you how much roll this truck had.
Oh, for sure. And, we're talking about this with 30 years of hindsight attached onto it as well. But when you get into the minutia of chassis dynamics and on power versus off power handling, this was all new for these guys back then. This was really
I'm sure they're all sitting back there scratching their heads trying to figure this out.
Yeah, you've got Equalizer and Taurus 3 that both have 4-link suspension setups, but they're nowhere near as soft as Bigfoot 8 is in terms of loading and unloading of the chassis and weight transfer and so forth. Those trucks pretty much just dug in and went, whereas Bigfoot 8's transferring the weight to make a lot of the power. They were running a fairly small engine at the time compared to some of the other guys and just, killing them on those indoor courses. And as we go outside here, the chassis has a chance to unload between the cars and you see what happens.
Yeah, and as a result, Bigfoot's also going to have to go and take another qualifying pass. Bigfoot immediately goes back to the line. Brass leaves the line this time. The truck appears to jump over this hole that's forming that you're going to hear a lot about on this show. There's a hole right there on this side of the track here in the right lane. He appears to jump over it, but even in the middle of no man's land, Matt, the truck just does not look comfortable. Andy's off the throttle until I believe he feels the front of the jump for the second hill and just goes straight over the cars. Bigfoot runs a time that would be a 6.42, but with the penalty, it's going to be a 9.42 for Bigfoot.
That's right. You could see Brass completely get out of the throttle in no man's land. He's definitely not comfortable in the truck at this point on this course.
Andy isn't really sure what happened on the pass. He mentioned that there's a hole that's forming in the cars on the right side of the track. The interesting thing here is it's only really affecting the newer style suspension trucks, at least according to Andy. It's going to affect some of these trucks here in a little while. Nobody's really going to want to go into that right lane. However, Brass believes it's really affecting these softer suspension trucks even more, and he is absolutely correct.
Yeah, he's saying that the hole is pulling the truck, one way or another. And I mean, yeah, he's got a good point. And you're also looking at this as he's the one in the truck. He can only see so much. He doesn't necessarily have as much video to look at as we do here, on the outside looking in. But there's definitely something askew in the track combined with the settings in the truck.
Equalizer's up right after Bigfoot to make its penalty pass and runs a 9.95. Greg Holbrook keeps the truck very low to the cars here. This is not a 100% on kill run for Equalizer. It's basically just to get a time for the Equalizer truck, and it's going to place him on what would have been a third quickest qualifying time. However, now Bigfoot and Equalizer are now 11th and 12th in the qualifying order. Who plays spoiler to Bigfoot and Equalizer here? None other than a truck out of North Carolina with big green flames on the front of it, and that's, of course, Dennis Anderson's Gravedigger.
Yeah, we get Digger against Clydesdale here in a qualifying run. One of the highlights here from the qualifying. And Dennis gets into that left lane for qualifying. They take off, and Dennis has a pretty smooth run, especially for his standard in 1990. Pretty much on power the whole way. Flies through the finish line, and man, what a smooth run from the Digger.
6.69 for Gravedigger, which is only 0.2 of a second off of what Bigfoot ran before the penalty.
Nice.
That says something right there. Anderson's on kill, and he is running extremely well on this course. He basically says, hey, my name is going to be on that left lane the entire night.
That's right. He understands that there's a problem in that right lane, and he says it's throwing the trucks off course. He's sticking in that left lane as long as he can. TNT rules, the top qualifier gets that lane choice throughout the entire night.
It was almost a little bit of a lack of confidence, though, in Dennis's interview when Chris asked him, hey, we've been talking about Bigfoot and Equalizer all night. Do we need to start mentioning Gravedigger? And Dennis says, those trucks are pretty tough. They both got a bad shot out there. I'm going to be hammering on those guys and try and get them. My truck is kind of outdated compared to what they have. Their trucks are about 2,500 pounds lighter than the truck that I have. We're going to give it our best shot. He just almost doesn't seem like there's a bit of confidence in his voice right here. And he also sounds pretty tired, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. Dennis had just an absolutely horrible summer. Just breakage almost every single weekend. You talked about the run in Richmond there. He takes the event win. But
yeah, that's the one highlight.
Yeah, otherwise, he's having an awful, awful summer. Drops down in the points. And, he's working on his new truck, Gravedigger 3. It's at home at the shop in Kill Devil Hills, but it's not done yet. Gary Porter helped him build that truck, and it wouldn't debut till November because he had so many issues, kind of like the USA 1 guys, just constantly fixing and repairing this existing truck, trying to keep, the bookings and everything going, make it to that next show. He didn't have time to get the new truck done.
Yeah, exactly. We go into the pairings here for round number 1. We've got number 1 Gravedigger taking on number 7 Wild Hair. Number 5 Clydesdale taking on number 11 Bigfoot 8. Number 3 the Outlaw taking on Buffalo Tremor, the number 9 qualifier. Number 4 No Problem and John Moore taking on number 10 Dave Wysoric and Nightlife. Number 6 King Crunch taking on number 12 Equalizer. Number 2 Gary Porter taking on number 8 USA 1. This pairing right here is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. First reason being, Gary Porter qualifies second. He doesn't get a highlight. He doesn't even get a mention on this until they're showing him a second quickest qualifier. Second thing, USA 1 was a truck they talked about at the beginning of the show. They don't show its qualifying pass either, so we don't know what happened with Wilkie here.
Yeah, there's just so much action in this episode. I guess they had to edit for time. And, it's worth noting, we were talking before we went on air here for the show, this is the first episode of Tough Tracks where it's all monster trucks only. No pulling highlights, no other featurettes in between. There's so much happening in Flemington tonight. With 12 truck field, it's all monsters for this hour of power.
Exactly, and that's the way it should be, ladies and gentlemen. No offense to pulling guys, but tough tracks, I mean, when I think tough tracks, I think of a tough track like Flemington, New Jersey, and these monster trucks that are on it. The trucks that they highlighted, Bigfoot, Equalizer, USA 1, 8th, 11th, and 12th in qualifying in a 12-truck field.
Just to shows you where the stories are. Holbrook talked in his interview that normally if you take the penalty, you can still come back and, qualify 7th or 8th or something like that. But everybody here is running strong. And with the 3-second penalty, he's pretty much going to be at the bottom. And it shows how close all these guys are running and qualifying, that even the fast time from Bigfoot with the 3-second penalty still puts him, next to last.
Exactly. And that's something that Greg Holbrook touched on just a little bit in an interview that they did with him. He said sometimes you could go out there, take a 3 second penalty, and still qualify sixth, seventh, eighth, somewhere in there in the kind of middle of the pack. It's not the case here. There's no slow trucks out there.
Right. We head into Wild Hair versus Gravedigger, and I love the end zone shot of the red headlights as the darkness is falling on Flemington Speedway. I'm looking at it right here. Man, it brings the mystique of that truck to life, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at that truck head on anytime. I've gotten lucky enough to snag several photos of that over the years where you're looking dead on center onto the headlights of Gravedigger, and it's just an awe-inspiring sight. Unfortunately, this is going to be the only time that we're going to see it tonight. Dennis has another barn burner run here. The truck goes from point A to point B straight. The problem is with the landing off of the second jump, bunch of smoke pouring out of the rear end, and it looks like Dennis has lost yet another transmission or drive shaft.
Yeah, I mean, Dennis had a killer run, takes the win by like 3 truck lengths over Wild Hair. And I wouldn't say Wild Hair had a terrible run, had a little bit of a weird bounce coming off the first set of cars, but Dennis just greases them and they pull in and they show that Dennis is having more mechanical problems. It looks like the jack shaft going into the transfer case.
Yep, and Army basically says this is a classic case of the man that won the battle and lost the war. Dennis Anderson, we understand you're not going to be coming back with the Gravedigger. No, I'm not. It's pretty sad, too. I feel like the left lane is the best lane to be shooting out of. I ran hard to earn that lane. I told the guys when we qualified that my name was on that lane all night long. I come out here first round and split the transmission housing wide open on the first run. Army replies back to him there, and he says, and Army almost says this like he's concerned for Dennis. He says, you seem tired. You really do tonight. I know you guys have been thrashing and chasing these guys and trying to put wins under your belt. This piece, it's the first time it's broken on the truck. I don't think I've ever seen that little short shaft break before. And he kind of gets Dennis to laugh a little bit here because Dennis basically says, hey, last week I was just bragging to these guys on this, and now I'm not going to brag about any part on this truck ever again.
Yeah, he said it's the only thing we hadn't broken in 2 years. He was telling his crew guys, and then they go out and break it that weekend. It's the weekend of irony when it comes to bragging on the truck's reliability, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And this is going to hurt Dennis as far as the top 5 in points go. I mean, that's not going to be a good points night. I mean, yes, he's going to get qualifying points. He's going to get points for a round 1 win. But round 1 win doesn't mean as many points as a final round victory, and that's what he was shooting for.
That's right. His prospects for 1990 would really take a bad tumble later in this week. We'll get to at the end of next week's episode when we talk about race number 2. But he's running a rough summer, Dennis is, and really having a tough time. And not to go too far off track, but Dennis tells the stories about times when he thought he was ready to hang it up and he was out of money and had nothing left to give. And it makes me wonder if this was one of those times.
I mean, it had to be, just looking at that stretch that he had. I believe it started in Dallas when they started to have a really bad go of things, and that's when the truck just basically stalls on the starting line. He gets one pass in Dallas during that historic 3-wide weekend, and then the truck is basically parked the rest of the weekend. And like I said, he doesn't get another win in TNT, on television anyway, until Richmond.
Right. Yeah, just a rough road to go for sure. And, speaking of another guy that's having a rough 1990 season, we head into Bennett Clark with the Clydesdale in the next race against Bigfoot.
Yeah, Bennett Clark here. I mean, got to be a little bit of a highlight. Number 5 in qualifying out of this field, mid-pack. Good job there for Bennett. The problem is he's got Bigfoot. Not just any Bigfoot, though. He's got Bigfoot 8.
Yeah, Bennett's having a rough season. Like we said, it goes over in Dallas, flips the truck over, gets the truck rebodied with a new scheme for the Tough Tracks toy line. Got the all-pink Clydesdale now. And in Louisville, tears the whole right rear end off the truck. I think John Moore said he welded that spindle up for him.
Yeah, and John, in that interview, John almost sounds concerned. He goes, "Oh man, I think I welded that for him."
Yeah, so Bennett's having a rough season too, but I think he keeps the truck together a little bit better here throughout the rest of the outdoor season. But he's definitely no match for Bigfoot 8, even though Brass still having some handling problems.
Yeah, Brass launches really wide to the left on the cars, and I can only think that is trying to avoid the hole that is forming, or the hole that he believes is there for this truck. He launches wide to the left, has to steer to the right to correct in no man's land, and still somehow ends up as straight as he's going to get for the final jump. Bigfoot skies that out over the last jump. He wins in a very sloppy pass. I would be interested to know the time on that run.
Not probably as fast as the qualifying time. And, it's amazing. Brass is basically coasting through over a third of the track and still finishing ahead of Bennett. And unfortunately for Bennett, he misses the second set of cars, straight on. Ends up
Yeah, he's
landing
got a
kind
bit
of
of a
on
steering issue.
Andy's. Lands on Andy's set of cars. He ends up getting DQ'd and can't come back as a fast loser.
It's a bad break for Bennett Clark here. Clydesdale actually is disqualified, as you were just saying. And the truck he jumps awkwardly. He lands in between the cars there, and he basically just lets the truck go wherever it wants to. He thinks he has a bit of a steering issue here. Andy Brass is interviewed after the pass, and Army basically says, "Hey, Andy, the chassis seems to have a little bit of a flex and twist in it. In qualifying, and it still seems to be there, to be honest with you." And Andy says, "Hey, that's right. The frame is flexing a lot. I think a lot of it has to do is it's just the cars. The truck is moving on the cars. It's getting into that big hole at the end. The truck falls into that hole and it throws it from one side to the other. It's causing us to have to react between the cars. It's slick too. Adjustments we're making. It's just sliding out there." One thing to note, they watered the track between rounds of racing here.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was to keep the dust down for TV, but Bigfoot's definitely having the handling problems. And now, as we see, he's made 3 runs on this course, none of them completely straight or under full power. Now is the time I'll bring it up. If Bigfoot 8 is in Bowling Green, if Bigfoot 8's in Richmond, is it even going to do
Bigfoot 8
as
is
well?
in Dallas.
Yeah, is it even going to do as well as 4 did at those shows? Because Bigfoot 8 might end up into the wall in Richmond, like King Crunch did.
Yeah, it's one of those big what if 8 had been in that five race stretch. It's something that's going to be debated until the end of time in monster truck racing. Trust me, between us old school guys.
And my position is that I don't think the truck does much better, especially with the tracks that we had. You send Bigfoot 8 to Louisville on that figure 8 course with all that traction, the truck's going to be hiking up the inside tires. And, Tremor had that issue in the following year with Bigfoot 9 in Louisville. It was untelevised, but shout out to Tad Goad. His dad videotaped that race and has it up on YouTube. Kramer even had some trouble at first getting around the track because the traction made the truck act weird. And I think Bigfoot 8 would have had some similar issues.
Yeah, I think it would have had quite a bit more issues than they had with 4, obviously. But if we move on to the next race, we got number 3, Outlaw, taking on Buffalo Tremor here. Mike Wine, not a surprise at all, going to take that left lane, kicks the Chevrolet over the right side, and you hear Army say, "These guys are hungry hombres," as they cut to the head-on shot of the trucks. Tremor gets the whole shot, but appears to really suffer off of that first set of cars. Wine gets over the first set and set up perfectly for the second, and Mike Wine looks very strong here in this pass.
Oh, yeah, good smooth run for the Outlaw. And as you said, Buffalo Tremor kind of gets that weird bounce on that last car that shoots him back up into the air heading off the approach. And that seems to be the difference here between these 2 trucks on this run.
I love the interview with Army here where Army basically says, "Hey, Mike Wine travels all over the country. This is as close as you're going to get to racing at home." That's right. This is the Jersey Outlaw, and this is New Jersey, ladies and gentlemen, here in Flemington, New Jersey. Basically says, "Hey, you're racing at home. It looks like you get the home court advantage going for you. It looks good tonight." And Mike almost seems a little bit flustered in his interview here. He says, "It's looking great. The truck's running great. We got the alcohol motor in it. Last week I hit the wall in Myrtle Beach. I was disgusted with that. We went home. We rebuilt the transmission. We redid the front end. I've not been home for 2 years. I'm pumped. This is fantastic." And that's off a round 1 win for Mike Wine. Imagine if he'd have won the final.
Oh, man, the whole place might have exploded. There wasn't a roof on Flemington Speedway to blow off, but Mike Wine probably would have, done the first donuts in front of the crowd there in a monster truck. It was just amazing to see how intense he was being his home show. He says, "I can go all the way tonight." And as we head into commercial, something I found kind of cool was they kind of give you a teaser for what's on the other side of the break. Still to come, first round action. These trucks are coming up. The production value as we get late into this Tough Tracks run is just really, really good. It's some of my favorite television.
Yeah, I agree. We'll get into that a little bit of a moment here in just a minute. One thing I want to point out is no problem in Nightlife's race right here. This is a battle of number 4 and number 10. Nightlife at a number 10 was a bit of a surprise to me, and John Moore at number 4 was an even bigger surprise to me. as far as this racing bracket goes. These guys are all over the place as far as where you would think these pairings would end up. We cut to an interview with John Moore, who said he was basically happy to have last week off. They asked him, hey, is there a chance that David Morris is going to come back and drive? Because, as we said, David Morris drove in Myrtle Beach the week before. John says, it's getting late in the point season, and we felt that David had an issue with the steering on the truck and trying to control it, so I took the job back over again. He basically says, hey, there's no ill will towards us and David Morris. He's probably going to come back again and drive in 1991. That never happened. But at the same time, like he says, no ill will, just David just didn't get along with the truck.
Yeah, and David was coming off of the 4-link Equalizer truck, and I'm sure it was a different experience for him in Myrtle Beach. He kind of picked it up pretty quick, I thought, over that weekend. And, like I said, I hope you get to cover that event with one of the other contributors here on the show, because there's a lot going on there. And David Morris in no problem. How many times do you say that? Just doesn't sound right rolling off the tongue, does it?
No, it doesn't sound right at all. Army pipes in here right before we go green and says that David Morris is looking for another ride in a monster truck. It's Ford, but it's a blue one.
Yeah, and people probably think that was just some kind of rumor, but in reality, that ended up happening. Just a couple weeks later, the Bigfoot Bash in Nashville, David Morris drove Bigfoot 3 at that show. I think it was Bigfoot 3. Jason Ronan was there. He can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was David and Bigfoot 3 there. So he did drive for the Bigfoot team, not very long, but he did contribute in that show, and he was in the big blue Ford truck for at least one weekend.
Yep, so Army wasn't wrong, but boy, that rumor mill started for quite some time after that. And honestly, there were a lot of people speculating for a number of years after that. Did David Morris drive Bigfoot? The answer is yes, just not in a major competition standards. It was basically Bigfoot versus other Bigfoot trucks.
Yeah, and they'd bring some people in for those big shows that they would do. The 5,000th show event that Bigfoot's been putting up on their YouTube channel lately. They brought some other guys in for that. Dan Patrick was helping build Bigfoot 8, and he got to drive Bigfoot 7 at that show. They had some other stand-in drivers as well. I think you could correct me if I'm wrong. I think Debbie Roden might have even driven at that show. So they would pull some people in from the industry to help fill in some empty seats at those big shows that they would do.
Yeah, and right here, after they get done talking about David Morris, we get a barn burner of a race, Matt. This comes down to about a 3-inch victory on the nightlife side of these trucks, basically they leave pretty close together, but I believe that Wysorek is a lot harder on the throttle because he knows he's in that right lane. He knows there's a hole over there, but I think that longer wheelbase truck soaks it up very well here. He gains a little bit of a lead, but he does lose a little bit in no man's land. I mean, John Moore, I believe it's been said that he's got a Bigfoot motor in this truck. So that truck comes on very strong in no man's land, and then coming through to the finish, we see Wysorek take the win by just maybe a tire tread. One of the closest races you're going to see in TNT.
Oh, for sure. This race goes back and forth a couple times, throughout the race. And we're watching the replay here. Wysorek gets just a little bit of a jump. I think coming off the first set, Moore has the lead, and then they kind of almost swap back and forth 2 more times as they're going up the second ramp. And Wysorek just barely pulls out the win. If the finish line had been another 15 feet down the track, I think John Moore takes the victory.
15 feet, maybe another 2 feet. John Moore would have tied him 3 feet. He'd have beat him. That's how close that race was tight.
Yeah, very, very close race. And Army says that the wind comes at about 3 inches. I'll give him a solid foot. But you can see that Dave just gets a little bit out of shape before that second jump cost him some of the momentum. And I think that's what allowed John Moore to come back in, but just barely hanging on the win for the nightlife.
King Crunch, number 6, taking on Equalizer here. And then we get to hear from Scott Stevens and his crew chief. If I remember right, I thought I heard him say they called him Crash on the radio here. Army jumps into the conversation as well. Crash says basically, go as hard as you can and be careful. The lights turn green. We see the race here, and Holbrook has the best race that he's had out of that right lane yet. Truck stays pretty low to the ground, just like he did in the qualifying pass. Ends up beating King Crunch here by a half a truck, which is big in the points for big in the points for Greg Holbrook. I don't know why. We just got talking about David Morris, so I think I want to call him David Morris. But anyway, good run, but he got you, is what Crash says to him. Scott says, I think we're the fast loser anyway. Crash replies, hopefully. And then Scott Stevens almost jubilantly says, I just turned 700 or 7,000 RPM.
Yeah. And, as we're going back and watching this race, Holbrook hangs another hard right in no man's land, but good for him. He was heading left coming off the first set of cars, so it kind of squared him up a little bit. Definitely that first set of cars in the right lane is still causing a big problem for these guys.
Army's going to interview Greg Holbrook right here, and Greg basically asked, hey, we heard that you had something wrong with your transmission. We saw that you guys were over there thrashing in the pit area. Do you guys have problems? Greg says, no, it's just a brake shield that got knocked up into the brakes after the first qualifying pass that they had made. Greg still doesn't seem like he's very happy to be a slower qualifier. However, he does bring up a very valid point, Matt, and that's a fact about this Equalizer truck, and that's the fact that they seem to do really good in really bad lanes.
Yeah, he manages to take the win that time anyway, even with the struggles we talked about. And Greg, kind of makes peace with the idea that he's stuck in that right lane all night because of he's, the low qualifier.
We get to what I think is going to be one of the heavyweight matchups of round number 1. It's also the last matchup of round number 1. Number 2, Carolina Crusher, taking on number 8, the USA 1. Like I said, heavyweight matchup here. 2 of the top Chevrolet trucks. They refer to Carolina Crusher as the most consistent truck on the tour, and they are not wrong. He beats USA 1 heads up here in a fantastic race, with USA 1 and Wilkie having to correct a bit over that first set of cars, and that's really what gives Gary Porter here the win. And, man, Wilkie, if he doesn't have to correct over that first set of cars, this is going to be another photo finish.
Oh, for sure. Wilkie in that right lane, even though the heavier truck, compared to the 4-link guys, he still has a little bit of issue with those cars, and Porter gets him just a slight bit off the line, but I think that's the difference, is coming off that first set of cars again. And Wilkie gives it a good run, ends up putting it into the catch cars at the end of the field that are guarding a chain link fence there, but just can't quite pull off the win against the Carolina Crusher.
And it seems to be an issue with the USA 1 truck in general, is the shutdown area. There have been quite a few shutdown area instances with this truck here lately, stemming all the way back to Dallas when it decided to destroy a generator.
Oh, for sure. I think we'll talk about this a little bit further in the broadcast or maybe next week's show. But there's a reason why that truck had some trouble slowing down, and we'll get to that in due time. But, we talked to Gary Porter here. He's ready to go for the next round. And, what do you have to say about this interview here with Army?
Well, I like the statement that Army makes at the very beginning here. He says, Gary Porter, there's no such thing as an easy round in this type of competition. And Gary kind of chuckles and says, yeah, sure isn't. Some tight racing. You're the second quickest qualifier. And who do you get in round number 1? A returning truck that is very, very hungry.
For sure. And I'll be honest, I have a hard time focusing on Gary's interviews because I'm just locked in on the angle of his hat bill. It's just solid from the time he starts racing monster trucks through about 2008. He puts that thing at a 90-degree angle, and it's just mesmerizing to me.
Well, there you go. If you ever want to be hypnotized by Gary Porter, there you go.
Yeah, I love Gary. He's one of the nicest guys. You get to talk to him at the Hall of Fame here and there when he shows up, and I'm a big fan of his. I'm glad I got to see him as much as I did before he retired. And we exit his interview and we pitched a commercial here in a couple different ways. We see a bunch of drivers taking a look at that right lane first set of cars. We see Steve Wilkie looking at it, trying to get ready for his next round, and then we pan back and we see Andy Brass, Greg Holbrook, John Pyatt. I think Dave Wysorik's in there somewhere, maybe looking.
Yeah, they're all surveying the hole in the cars, while Wilkie, he's kind of taking a little bit smarter strategy, in my opinion, and that's looking straight down the track and trying to figure out his line that he's probably going to take.
For sure. And then, we see the brackets heading up for the second round here. And then something I find really cool and interesting, we pitched a commercial with Steve Wilkie and Mike Wine cutting promos on each other going into commercial.
Oh, yeah. These two guys are never at a loss for words. And I like Steve Wilkie here saying, hey, Tough Tracks fans, when you come back, you're going to see the USA 1 Chevrolet go against the Jersey Outlaw. It's going to be a battle. Stay tuned. Mike Wine will be right back. And that soft tone of Mike Wine, of course, Steve thinks he's going to get me in a quarterfinal round. Wrong. It's Ford and Chevrolet. Ford with a brand new motor. Chevrolet has been great all this season until he met the Outlaw. I got him next round. He's going down. I love the tone in Mike Wine's voice is like the evil villain. And Steve Wilkie is like, "Hey guys, how's it going?"
I love it. I mean, we're both wrestling fans, and this is kind of like a wrestling vignette promo style of interview they're doing here, but I think it works. I don't know whose idea it was because I don't think they did this earlier in the season at all. You guys can probably correct me in the comments there, but I don't know if this was Mike Goss's idea because he
One
was
of the
kind of the production guy.
one of the things I remember was in '89, the very last race of '89 was when Dennis does the sky wheelie against Outlaw. They do a little bit of a promo back and forth with him and Dennis. But that's the last time I remember this happening until this point.
Yeah, they were kind of riffing back and forth in that interview, but that was like a regular interview as part of the show. I mean, this was like done on purpose, talking to the fans at home rather than to the interviewer, which I found just, so different and interesting. And I mean, it works. I don't have any issue with it. It kind of sets the stage and builds some drama for the next round. Don't go away during that commercial because these guys are going to go at it.
Exactly. And the next round pairings here, it almost breaks my heart to see Wild Hair and Bigfoot, because there's a big part of me that wanted to see Dennis and Andy race one another on this night.
Yeah, it's amazing how few times Bigfoot and Digger go head to head at this point in monster truck history. I think you put together a video of most of the head to head shootouts, and it's not that many, not as many as you'd think it would be anyway.
Yeah, it's not as many as you think, all the way up from when Dennis wins in St. Paul all the way up to the 1990 TNT era. There's only a couple of times that Bigfoot and Digger actually do line up against each other, and most of them happen in '89 on the New York miniseries. Compared to here in 1990, there's only, I believe, one other time, I think, in 1990. Well, actually, no, I take that back. There's a couple of times they face off in 1990, but the one that comes to mind is Bowling Green, and that's when Dennis has a little bit of a motor issue, and John Pyatt just puts the wood to the floor.
Yeah, I mean, you would hope that as a fan that you'd get to see these guys go head to head every week, but I'm thinking, you've got what? They went once in Memphis, Bowling Green. Was that it for the season for 1990 on TV?
Honestly, I'd have to go back and look at it again, but that sounds about right.
Yeah, so you've got, the two most popular trucks at the time. You always want to see those guys go head to head. And they did a lot off camera at a lot of fair shows and, some of the untelevised events. It seemed like when TV cameras were on, they just never really found each other for some reason.
And I always found that odd, but at the same time, that's racing. Sometimes you get what you want, sometimes you don't. And this is one of those occasions where you don't really get what you want. And man, I was praying for a Bigfoot Digger race right here, because I think it would have been a great one, knowing Dennis was going to have his lane that he wanted and Brass was going to have to do some correcting to try and get that truck to stay straight. That would have been a battle, but not to throw Wild Hair straight under the bus here. I still, like I said, I'm selfish. I wanted the Digger Bigfoot matchup.
Yeah, for sure. And I've always kind of had a soft spot in my heart for Wild Hair. The way that truck looked is so cool. I'm from Pittsburgh, love the black and gold. Those are my colors on all my vehicles. So the look works. And when I bought my classic trading cards way back in like '95 or whenever I got them at a card show, a Wild Hair was my favorite card for sure. And Marvin gets better throughout this season. He was always kind of, I don't want to say he was a back marker or a B teamer, but, he was driving an older truck and had some struggles. He always made the show, but had a lot of trouble getting past the first or second round. And here, as Wild Hair's got a newer engine, he's got the new chassis underneath the truck as well. He is getting more and more competitive as this 1990 season goes on.
Yeah, and he's also getting extremely lucky breaks, and that's what he gets right here. There's like I said, a big part of me that wishes it had been Digger 2 and Bigfoot 8, but Bigfoot has a big issue right here. Another bad landing off that first set of cars. Brass actually has so much of a lead that by the time he's on the brakes and trying to hit this second jump, Wild Hair is still trying to come around him.
Yeah, coming off the first set of cars, the truck just takes that same bounce and hook to the right. He's about 2 or 3 truck lengths ahead of Wild Hair at the point. And Andy, you see the truck dive forward. He actually gets on the brakes trying to get the thing squared up for the second set. And we come back to the slow steering response. It seems like it takes forever for those front wheels to come around. And he doesn't get up on.
Yeah, they come around too late on him.
Yeah, he doesn't get up
get
the second
both
set of
fronts onto
cars.
the jump.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny about it is, yes, he doesn't get both fronts onto the jump, and Andy doesn't give up. He stays in it and drives the truck on two tires, basically across the hoods of the cars.
Oh yeah, you got to give it a shot. I mean, Andy still makes it to the finish line first through all of this, but just didn't get those front two tires up, and that costs him the win.
Exactly. And Chris Chapman asked him, Andy, you got that hole twice, and he says, yes, I did. Something we've been trying to figure out. I tried to pull a little bit to the side, which he tried to line up a little bit to the left, and he just guessed it was too much, that too far, that he lined over. Chris said, what about the next time on tough tracks? Are we going to see a major change, or are you just going to ride it out? And this is to your point earlier. Basically, Andy says, hey, we're just going to have to ride it out. We're on a big tour. It's hard for us to work on the truck out where we're at when we're hitting show after show after show. We're trying to make adjustments on it and get used to the track. We've been out with this truck for 2.5 months. It's kind of hard on me and the truck.
Yeah, these guys were pretty much barnstorming throughout this summer. Starting here in Flemington, they did I forget, 7 or 8 shows in 10 days. I mean, they were racing almost every single night. That New York tour was brutal on the equipment. And some of these shows, they only ran each place one night. So it was get the thing in, run, hopefully not get any damage, get it packed up and on to the next place. And it's, for the top guys that are at every show, Bigfoot, Gravedigger, USA 1, you've got to keep the truck rolling. You don't have time to make any big adjustments or improvements.
To compare what they're going through with this New York mini series, it's almost like what they're going through right now on, I believe it's called Rocky Mountain Race Week. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's a drag racing event where you take your car that you're going to drag race and you drive it through a week's driving time to 4 or 5 different drag strips along the way, and your average time is what you're basically based off of at the end of the weekend, or at the end of the week, excuse me. Not necessarily, it's similar, but it's not similar in the same way. But but what I'm trying to compare it to is the fact that for drag racing, that's a grueling stretch that they have to go on. For monster trucks, this is that grueling stretch, and that's the New York mini series.
For sure. And Bigfoot takes the loss here, and they have to put it on the trailer for the night, and we head on to the next matchup.
Yeah, and Brass is not happy, but you can tell he's frustrated, but he's almost just like, we'll get him next time. Don't worry. Almost that Andy Brass smirk, ladies and gentlemen. Never count him out, even when he's out. USA 1 and Outlaw, I think they moved this matchup up just a little bit. This would probably have been the last matchup that the live crowd would see, but they move it up here, I think, for TV purposes because they just hyped it up. Like I said, USA 1, Outlaw, they've been hyped up quite a bit. The problem is, Mike Wine, as good as he looked in round 1, it looks like they may have had an issue in round 2 here and not even noticed it before they got to the line. As USA 1 goes on to take the win by a country mile, as Outlaw is stalled on top of that left lane's first set of cars.
Yeah, you can see Outlaw loses power, and then it almost looks like the drive line locks up, but I think Mike actually got on the brakes because he wasn't sure what was wrong. The tires lock up down the off-ramp of the first set of cars. And Wilkie's lucky that this happened because he did not have a good smooth run in that far lane either. I think Outlaw could have took him.
Yeah, I think Outlaw would have taken him here. Honestly, with as good as that truck looked out of the left lane, it seemed like the trucks that you would expect and be like the big fan favorite trucks, Gravedigger, Outlaw, Carolina Crusher, again. Those 3 trucks seem to just be nailing that left lane. And nobody else can seem to get the luck that they need out of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's the breaks of racing. And, we talked to Steve Wilkie here. This is something interesting I see, and I noticed as I was doing my notes for the show. The winners get to talk to Army Armstrong, and the losers got to go talk to Chris Chapman.
I wonder why.
I feel bad because Chris is a amazing interviewer for somebody that was outside of the industry coming in. I don't know what she did necessarily before in terms of her profession, but she was a beauty contestant from the Owensboro area. She was Miss Kentucky, almost made it to be Miss America a few years prior to this, and I'm sure that they had some connection to her with TNT being headquartered in Owensboro, but she was a fantastic interviewer. I think one of the better pit reporters in the history of the sport.
Yeah, I can agree with you there. I think she does a little bit better job maybe with handling some of the downer interviews, unfortunately, and that's what she has to deal with a lot of the time. Army interviews Steve Wilkie here, and he basically says, "Hey, what's it feel like out there?" And Wilkie says, "It's slick, Army. The track is making so much power, or the truck is making so much power tonight that when he comes off the first stack, he's really got to drive it around." And by that, it's kind of almost like comparing it to what you saw with Bigfoot in the previous round. He's getting off the first stack, he's kind of having to muscle the truck in no man's to keep it straight for the final set of cars.
Yeah, and we go to the commercial. USA One moves on, and as we head into that commercial, we see Nick Rossi, the owner of the Outlaw, with that broken front drive shaft.
Yeah, he's under there wrenching on the truck because, like I said, he might be out tonight. There's still one more day of competition here in Flemington, and they've got to get it fixed for that next day.
That's it. You never give up, and you got to get the truck ready for the next night. And if you can get the truck fixed before you go to bed, makes things a little easier to get ready for the second day.
Exactly. You can actually get some sleep, and you can take your time on the next day. Nightlife and King Crunch up here next. Crunch was indeed the fast loser, as Steven said over the radio in the previous round. And interesting to note that now he is in the left lane here. I guess even though he was a faster qualifier and lost, he still gets lane choice here over Nightlife.
I guess that's the rule. I don't have a TNT rule book, unfortunately, to see if there's any competition rules that dictate how this all works out. But I guess the rule prevails that if you were the faster qualifier, you get the lane choice, right?
That's what it appears to be. And in this run, Scott Stevens' King Crunch just does not look like it's 100%. It's maybe running about 75% this entire pass. Does not get off the line good. Wysorek actually has quite a bit of a lead on him. And then right as Stevens starts to get towards the last jump here, it looks like the top end finally kicks in on King Crunch. And he just sneaks out this tight race at the line over Dave Wysorek and Nightlife. So Wysorek gets a photo finish on his record in the first round. Second round, it doesn't go quite his way.
Yeah, and you're talking about King Crunch not looking good. I was trying to listen on the audio, and it was hard to tell, but it almost seems like the truck might have slipped out of gear or something, because when Scott's in no man's land, you finally see the thing catch and take off as he's about halfway through no man's land, and that's where he makes up the distance on Wysorek, and just barely, again, some close race in Flemington, but King Crunch barely gets the win, and Wysorek kind of got out of shape heading over that second set of cars, and maybe that impeded his momentum enough to put him behind.
Yeah, Wysorek actually launches a little bit to the right, whereas King Crunch, after the finish line, Crunch just basically makes a hard left straight into the pit area to avoid the cars at the end of the track. Army interviews Scott Stevens right here, and Army says these guys are going so quick that when they get to the end of the track, they're looking for holes to hide in. Well, excuse me. He didn't interview Scott yet. He says that at the end of it. Then he interviews Scott, and he says, King Crunch wins by about 6 inches. You told us on the radio that you thought the motor was leaned out. What does that mean in layman's terms? Basically, Scott says, well, we were really trying to gear up for that round for Equalizer. Interesting note right there. Dave says that he ran the truck all year, but we felt like we had to handle, Dave has ran real quick all year, but we feel like we have a handle in that left lane and have ran quick all night. It's like it's not getting enough fuel right now. It's not responsive enough. It was a happy medium right there. We know we have to lean it out, and then we'll fatten it up here in a little bit, and we'll go back to the setup that we had in the first round race against Equalizer. Maybe we can get a little bit better.
Yeah.
So leaning the truck out, he's starving it for fuel in that sense.
Right, yeah. Army says, can you explain what leaning it out means? And then Scott proceeds to just not explain what that means at all. On top of that, he says he's going to fatten the truck up later and doesn't explain that half of the equation either. But, the guys are excited. They're doing the interview. For those who don't know, a lean condition is where the vehicle is getting too much air, not enough fuel, and a rich or a fat condition is where you have too much fuel and not enough air. You're always looking for that good air to fuel mixture. When you're running any kind of performance vehicle, and it was always a big concern when the guys would go up to Pueblo. You're up over a mile high, I think, at that arena there at the Colorado State Fairgrounds, and they had to lean the trucks way down to get the air fuel mixture proper so the truck would even run.
Yep, and right here, Stevens basically is looking ahead in the bracket, like he's not even going to look at Gary Porter. He basically says, hey, we're gearing up for Equalizer. We're looking towards Equalizer. Well, the problem is Equalizer's got a big yellow truck standing in its way to get to that semifinal round, and that's Gary Porter. And that's a truck that's been a thorn in that Equalizer truck's side since 1989.
Oh, for sure. Porter, I'm going to call it just a straight up win. I mean, Holbrook has a pretty decent run. He takes a little bounce off that first set of cars, but nothing he can't really overcome. Porter just lays down a perfect shot in that left lane and has the speed. Takes it by what, a tire length?
Yeah, about a tire length here victory for Carolina Crusher. Heads up, straight up race. As much as Greg Holbrook would want to say, "Oh, we hit that hole again and we had a bad bounce." Yes, he does have a little bit of a bounce coming out of that car stack, but by that point, Porter's already gone. He's chasing Gary down. Porter beat him out of the hole, and that's what won the race.
Yeah, I mean, the heavier truck in this instance may have been a little bit of an advantage. You see the trucks, the ramps aren't very tall or steep here in Flemington. The trucks are driving over the cars, and I'm guessing that the heavier weight kind of helps smooth the ride out a little bit for Porter over this run.
Army interviews Greg here, and one thing to point out, and I want you guys to remember this for day number 2. It looks like there was 3 loud pops that came from the Equalizer truck, and Greg just kind of brushes it off and says, "Oh, that's when we hit the rev limiter." Keep that in mind for day number 2.
Yeah, loud pops is generally not hitting the rev limiter. I'm not sure what Greg's automotive background was at that point, but you see some, I'll call it inexperience with the mechanical side of the truck throughout the rest of the season, where he thinks that there's no problem or one thing's a problem, and in reality it's something totally different. And there's definitely
the inexperience of a rookie trying to diagnose it as well.
Well, he's also an 18-year-old kid at this point. He probably doesn't have a ton of mechanical exposure beyond this. He raced quads and stuff as a kid, but that was all two-stroke back at that time. Much simpler design, much simpler to operate and maintain than a racing engine. Gary Cook, turning most of the wrenches on the machine at this point, and a mechanical genius in his own right. But I think that Greg may have been a little bit misdiagnosing the issue here, and we'll talk about that a little bit more next week.
Greg does give a great explanation, though, as far as what the trucks are doing in that right lane. He says the leaf spring trucks are doing okay with it. Our suspensions, they're so independent, the tire just follows the contour of the car, and when they drop in that hole, that's where they want to go. It's a great explanation to explain why the truck is probably getting thrown from one side or the other, especially if they have an open differential on these vehicles.
Oh, for sure. And then we see the camera shot of the last 2 cars in that right lane on the first set. And boy, they are awfully pushed in compared to normal. And TNT would put hay bales and tires inside the cars to try to support them and keep them even. They had learned that, all the way back in the 88 season. But for some reason, they didn't hold up in those 2 cars. And it's really making the difference in the lanes here.
Yeah, it's destroyed that right lane's launch over there. The thing of it is, though, I'm not so sure that both lanes are that much different at this point.
Yeah, it seems like the speed runs are still coming out of the left lane, but if you get a heavy truck in that right lane, it's not quite as much of a disadvantage as the 4-link trucks.
Semifinals, and I don't think you would ever expect to see at least one of these trucks here. Wild Hair are going to be taking on USA number 1. Carolina Crusher and King Crunch. We have 2 fast losers that make their way into the semifinals, and one truck that hasn't crossed the finish line first all night, but does have 1 round win under its belt, and that's the Wild Hair truck.
Yeah, and USA 1 versus Wild Hair, and unfortunately for Marvin Smith, he stutters real bad off the line here. Wilkie is going to take what looks to be an easy win, but I'll tell you what, Marvin's charging hard at the end here, almost makes up the difference.
Yeah, I mean, Marvin has a good run after the truck finishes stalling on him. He gets the fuel to the motor. The truck takes off over that first set of cars, and he starts to catch up on Wilkie. But I think Wilkie pretty well knew at that point he had the race won, so you might have backed out of it just a little bit. But the truck does not get stopped in time at the end of the track, and here Army basically say, "Whoa," as he bumps the car at the end of the track that's blocking a fence, and it actually does push the fence back just a little bit.
Yeah, and Army says, there's something up with the USA 1 truck. I don't know why it has so much, trouble stopping or doesn't brake as quick as the other trucks. And in reality, it's because the truck doesn't have planetaries. And I think at this point, it doesn't even have driveline brakes. They're running hub brakes on USA 1. So you don't have the mechanical advantage of the planetary. at your disposal, and you also don't have the mechanical advantage of the ring and pinion at your disposal. I think they were still running hub brakes on USA 1 at this point, so it takes a lot to get that truck slowed down when you're basically running a stock braking setup.
Yeah, and I mean that's something that USA 1 was always classic for. Is the look, it almost had a stock appearing look to it. It just had giant tires underneath of it.
Yeah, and so I mean that kind of answers Army's question a little bit. We know later on, through many more years of development in the industry, how much the brakes make a difference on the drive line. A lot of the guys were running them back then, but not everybody. The only real outlier to the driveline pinion brake setup is the Bigfoot team running the ZF axles, but they have internal wet brakes on each wheel that give them an incredible amount of stopping power because they don't fade. Personally, I think it's a better setup because you can brake the wheels independently. If you lose a ring and pinion, or if you lose an axle shaft with an open differential with pinion brakes, you have no brakes at that end of the truck. Yeah. And Bigfoot's setup, you still have a brake at each wheel on the hub to stop. But they're so much better brakes because they're an internal wet brake design. They're cooled. They stay nice and grippy, and it works really well. So those heavy axles that Bigfoot uses, the ZF APL 765s, I think they are, the brakes are different, and I think that gives them a big advantage in some of the small arenas nowadays. And boy, I bet Wilkie was probably wishing that they had that kind of axle sometimes because he had trouble getting that thing stopped.
If you ever wonder why I have Matt on the show, he just literally pulled out the part number for the axle that Bigfoot runs.
Well, I got to thank Marty Garza for writing the Truck World articles way back in the 90s. Those numbers kind of stuck in my head.
Yeah, but that sticks in your head, and that's why I like to have you on this show, is stuff that you remember is stuff I probably don't even know anything about.
And I'm sure there's a sub number of that axle that I forgot, a subscript somewhere, but I think they were 765s that the Bigfoot team uses nowadays. And we'll put a plug in here for Marty's book. You can read all about those different axle combinations and Monster Truck Technology. Wonderful, wonderful purchase for anybody that's heavy into monster trucks. And if you're listening to this show, you probably should have that book.
Yep, I agree with you 100%. I got mine on order. I still need to read that. Carolina Crusher going to go into the next race here against King Crunch. The number 2 qualifier, still most consistent truck on the circuit. He's going to be taking the left lane as looks like Scott Stevens going to go over to the bad right lane, and we get more radio communications right here, Matt.
Yeah, and the radio communications is kind of cool because they didn't record that afterwards. You can see Scott reach up and hit the radio box every time he talks in the cab. That was recorded live as it was happening. So I thought that was pretty cool and innovative at the time. The trucks kind of leave together, but Porter just a little bit sluggish up that first ramp.
Yeah, and Scott Stevens gets the whole shot on him, and he has to maintain that whole shot all the way down through no man's land. Porter's coming on strong, though. They get to the finish line, and for the second time in a row here, Scott Stevens has a photo finish and barely, and I mean just barely, beats Gary Porter across the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, I'd call this one of the races of the night for sure. Scott comes over the radio and asks if he wins, and Crash Ford says, yes, you got him. And I'll let you take the famous quote here.
I can tell you, I have no idea how many times over the years I have repeated that famous quote. Did we win? You know who does it best is Lonnie Childress. If you ever have a chance, and I'm throwing Lonnie under the bus, if you're listening to this show and you ever have a chance to meet Lonnie Childress, say, I want to hear your Scott Stevens impression. And if he doesn't give it to you, say Josh Rhodes is going to be very upset.
I'll have to ask him for it next time I see him. I can't wait to hear it.
Oh, he does an extremely good job of it. And honestly, I'm going to pipe that clip in for it because me doing it doesn't do it justice. It's one of the greatest things I've heard, and it's one of the things that's always stuck with me in monster trucks.
Did we win? Yeah. King Crunch is going to keep them still in Flemington, New Jersey.
I love how excited he is as well when he's calling back to the team during that whole little thing that he does right there. In the last 2 races in the right lane, though, he has done 2 things, though, that I noticed, Matt. Number 1, he got the whole shot on the truck in the left lane and cleared the whole of the cars with the front tires. And number 2, he give up a little bit of the lead he had on that whole shot that he's taken over those cars, but he maintained it enough to pull away at the top end of the track.
Yeah, and they're pushing the truck hard here. You can see that the engine's getting hot. Speaking again to the lean condition we were talking about earlier, he holds on for the win, though. Scott Stevens doing a great job pushing the truck to the limit. We then go to see Gary Porter up on the timing stand here, taking a look at the video. Gary, always the consummate competitor, wants to make sure that everything's clear and he understands where the difference was. And there were some times that I think he may have got robbed on the TV camera. So I don't blame him for going up and checking with the guys when it's a close race like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a good thing it's a good thing that Gary did that. Then Chris almost pokes the bear just a little bit afterwards and says, we lost the race by about 6 inches. He knows he got beat. But Chris, how does that make the old heart feel?
Yeah.
Gary, it's really a letdown. And I'm thinking, Chris, the man is about to go cry in the pit lane. All right, geez.
Yes, I mean, I bet he takes the loss on the chin, takes it like a man, and then he'll be back next week.
One thing that always got to me about Tough Tracks was the Monster Smash final music. I absolutely hated the Monster Smash final music. I've said it a million times on here, but thankfully we don't have to listen to it very long here. And the interesting thing about this final that we've got the two fast losers taking on each other.
Yeah, they're both coming through the loser portion of the bracket, and this is, Josh, where I got to disagree with you. I love the Monster Smash final build-up. I think it builds the drama. I like the way Chris introduces it here, and it just works for me. I don't know why. Maybe I'm a sucker for the drama side of it, but I love the build-up. It gets me every time. It gets me jonesed up, ready to see showtime going into the finals.
I have to disagree with you. I think it's a lot better of a chance for somebody like Army Armstrong to really hype up these two trucks and talk about their run through the bracket as they're lining them up. And you see Scott Stevens doing his mind games where he goes in and out of the starting line area and passes the staging lane over and over and over again. I think that they could do a whole lot more talking about the final round and building it than a little bit of music.
Yeah, I think there was an opportunity probably to do that some beforehand too. I think there's a place probably for both, but I'm gonna stand firm on I'm loving the music buildup. It's just the first time I watched Tough Tracks where they used that, I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. But if we ever do, some other episodes, I'm a sucker for some of the cheesy stuff too, which is why I definitely can't wait to do some Monster Wars action with you here in the future.
Oh, here we go, Monster Wars. All right. This race right here basically comes down to Steve Wilkie just nailing the throttle. And that's something that USA 1 did quite a lot back in the day. Wilkie gets the whole shot. He has probably the best run over the top of the first set of cars in the right lane, skies it out over the second lane, and just puts a whooping on Scott Stevens right here. I actually timed this because this run just looks so fast to me. Wilkie runs a 6.41 second pass right here on my stopwatch, which would have been good enough for #1 qualifier in that bad lane, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean, Steve is on kill here for the finals, and he's one of the few guys throughout the whole night that clears that gap in the cars with his front tires. I'm not sure if it was just the way the truck hit that first set of cars, if he ran up the middle of the cars a little bit more where they weren't crushed down as much, or what the situation was, but the truck kind of has a little bit of a tail down attitude over that first set, and he just barely clears that front axle over that hole. And I think that makes the difference here in this race, because Stevens doesn't put in a bad run. He runs good, and he's making up a little bit of time here at the end, but the difference was over the first set in the starting line.
Yeah, and that was where Steve Wilkie wins this race, right off the line. He flies past the finish line, and of course, as we've said earlier in this broadcast, and as a few other broadcasts, USA 1 doesn't know how to stop.
Yeah.
The truck just bounces straight into the car at the end of the track, and actually this time pushes the fence over behind it.
Yeah, Wilkie extends the infield of the Flemington Speedway about 10 more feet, doing a little bit of facility damage, which I'm sure that the TNT folks weren't happy with, but you got to go all out for the win.
Yep. One thing that I really liked here is they show the truck pulling up to the front stretch of Flemington Motor Speedway, and you can actually hear the crowd. If you listen very closely, you hear the crowd going, USA, USA. This crowd was really hyped up for this event, and almost made me wonder if Hacksaw Jim Duggan or Hulk Hogan was getting ready to walk out on the track here in that chant.
I mean, USA 1, you got to remember, is still one of the most popular trucks on the tour, probably only behind Bigfoot and Gravedigger in terms of fan engagement. It's the 1988 champion, still a big name, got the corporate backing from Chevrolet and everything, and True Value. So they're a superstar, truly, on this tour. And even though they've been having a rough year overall in 1990, they're still a fan favorite.
Yeah, and say what you want about the Everett Jasmer team, but they look like they basically took a truck that a lot of people criticized them for even bringing back, and their first event out with it. Yes, they had their fair share of problems and they threw out the night, but so did every other team out there, other than Gary Porter, really, who had just smooth A to B passes the entire night. The USA 1 truck just seemed to be the truck to beat the entire night.
Yeah, and Wilkie was one of those guys that if he could start going a couple rounds, he would get better every single run. And we see it here throughout the night where he starts off kind of rough, but by the finals, he's in good shape and puts a laser shot down through the infield of Flemington Speedway.
Army stands by with both the guys here. Army says in Flemington, New Jersey, one of these guys could have gone bear hunting with a switch tonight. I just love that quote. Bear hunting with a switch tonight. They had a double throwdown run. Anybody had a shot, but things just went his way as he turns to Scott Stevens, and Stevens says, hey, USA 1 was doing really good coming back from the wreck that they had a few weeks ago in Richmond. Wilkie had it going good. I thought I had a good advantage. I put him in the bad lane. I kind of knew the bad lane, though, wasn't a bad lane because we had just beat Carolina Crusher out of it. He was running good. He was quicker every pass. No excuses. His truck works good. Our truck was working good, but ours was just a little bit off tonight.
That's it. And an interesting fact, this is the last televised win for USA 1.
And a heck of a way to go out with the crowd just chanting its name over the PA speakers. Basically, you could hear this, and it was something to behold here. Army basically says after Scott Stevens here, there's nothing to be ashamed of there. You've got another shot here next week in New Jersey. And we're going to go talk to Steve now. Everybody knew that this was a short course, but yours was the only truck that was running into stuff at the other end. Why could you not stop your truck? The guy just goes out, wins this big race, has all this controversy he has to come back from, and the first thing Army has to ask is, why'd you hit the car?
Yeah. And I mean, part of the contributing factor of that too is Wilkie takes a huge bounce off that second set of cars. He's spending a lot of time in the air. And I'm sure that they had learned that you can't really get on the brakes too hard when the truck's still bouncing, especially with the straight 5 tons, because if you come down bouncing on the brakes, you're going to blow the axle shafts right out of those 5 tons at that point. You don't have the planetaries helping you with the gear reduction, and I think they kind of had figured that out by that point because of some of the issues Rod had the year prior. And if that's the first question Army's got for him, I guess it's fair game, but I think you'd probably want to focus on the win here.
Oh, yeah. Steve basically says, hey, it's not the fact that we wouldn't stop, Army. I just don't get out of it going across the finish line. I'll tell you what, 1990 outdoors, we're going to put another one together, Army. We have to. He's very confident after this victory here, and the USA 1 truck should be confident after a win like that. But like you said, though, unfortunately, they don't go on and win any more this season. This is the last bit of a moment of glory for the USA 1 team.
It's the last moment of glory, period, pretty much. I mean, less than a year later, they'd be pretty much out of the sport in terms of a competitive race environment. And things would really, really take a bad turn about 3 weeks later in Stafford Springs. So, we head in, they're wrapping the episode up pretty quick here. Within the last 15 seconds of the episode, they're saying, we're going to cover the points real quick. And an important note here is that the points gap between Bigfoot and Equalizer stayed the same.
Yeah, nobody gained on anybody. They both went out in the same exact round. They didn't get any points in qualifying between each truck. Equalizer 544 to Bigfoot's 464. Carolina Crusher chiming in at 443, closing in on Bigfoot a little bit. King Crunch closing in a little bit on Carolina Crusher at 428. Digger stays at 294. Awesome Kong 276. USA 1 273. Nightlife 260. Outlaw 236. And Buffalo Tremor breaks the 200s at 202.
Yeah, they wrap this one up in a hurry and kind of give you the send-off with the finishing graphics. So that's going to pretty much wrap it up for night number 1 of Flemington, New Jersey. on Tough Tracks. We recommend you watch along with us. And if you want to go take a look at the other episodes, I'm not sure if the Trucks and Tractor Power version or the Monster Truck Challenge version is up on YouTube. You may have to dig a little bit for it. But the Tough Tracks is the one that we're covering here today. And we certainly appreciate you, following along with us. I want to take the opportunity and thank you, Josh, for having me on again. I love doing this podcast with you. It's a lot of fun getting to watch these shows with a critical eye. And, I want to take the opportunity to ask everyone, please go out and donate blood. As a leukemia survivor, I used up a lot of it, and I hope to be able to give that back someday. So call your local American Red Cross station, Vitalant location, wherever you can donate blood. There's a lot of people out there that need it, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there. Please go out and do that, guys. That's something that's still in shortage to this day, and it's going to be something that we're always in shortage for. So please go out there, donate some blood at your local Red Cross or any other blood donation facility.
For sure. So, Josh, do we have anything up to round up this Retro Monster Truck review for this week?
Well, this was Wilkie's first race back after a horrible accident in Richmond, Virginia. He claims the win in an event that honestly was just filled with drama, excitement, fantastic racing, a lot of storylines. But the biggest one coming out of it has to be the fact that this is, like you said, USA 1's last televised win. The fact that it was an amazing racing final round that we got. It was so many photo finishes that we saw. And the fact that the broadcasting itself between Chris Chapman, Scott Douglas, and Army Armstrong was just so damn good. I honestly, this is one of the events that I wanted to rate this a complete 10 out of 10, but I got to give it a 9.5 as far as everything goes.
Yeah, I'm giving it a solid 9 at least as well. The back half of the 1990 season for Tough Tracks, man, everything just clicked in terms of the TV production. I love the way they present the television show. The graphics are good. The soundtrack is good. Mike Goss and the production team for TNT did a fantastic job capturing the action and producing these television shows. Kudos to them. We're still talking about them here 30 years later.
Yeah, and this event was one that I really couldn't wait to talk about. That's why it's episode 20 here, and it's going to be episode 21 next week when we cover Flemington, New Jersey, day number 2, the return of Bigfoot 8, the return of its USA 1 truck this entire weekend. It's something that was always on my mind as a kid. I actually have both Monster Truck Challenge versions of this on VHS somewhere. I just don't have a VCR to play them on anymore. But we'll be covering the Tough Tracks episode again next week. It'll be me and Matt one more time here on the Retro Monster Truck Review. I hope you guys have really enjoyed it. And again, we will always see you guys on the tracks across America. Hey everybody, this is Josh Rhodes jumping here very end of the podcast. Just want to thank everybody for all the 5-star reviews on Apple iTunes. Please, I'm going to ask you guys one more time, give us some more. Review this podcast, really help that algorithm out and get us out there for more eyeballs. Also, don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, Retro MT Review on YouTube. You can find us on there, and you can find every episode of this show. There's even a long playlist on there. If you want to just binge listen to every single one of the shows, it's all right there, as well as on Spotify. If you want to follow us on Spotify, it will also always be uploaded there as well. Flemington was just too much show to get on to one full episode here. So, next week, Matt's going to be back with me, and we're going to be talking Flemington, New Jersey, day number 2, and that's where the action picks up, and it gets a little bit spicier as we move on in the 1990 TNT Point season. Until then, though, everybody, please, always, always stay with us on the tracks across America.